There's a specific kind of person who walks into a sparse, almost empty room, bare walls, a few plants, a single couch, and feels something loosen in their chest, like they can finally exhale. And then there's everyone else, standing in that same room, feeling vaguely unsettled, maybe even sad. What separates these two people isn't taste. Minimalism is more than a design preference, it's practically a personality signature. Psychologists spent decades studying what humans actually need to feel psychologically well, fundamentally okay at a deep level, and not just happy or successful. And one of the three core needs they identified was autonomy. People need to feel like their life actually belongs to them, like the choices they make, the spaces they live in, the way they move through the world. All of it reflects who they actually are, rather than who they feel pressured to be. When that feeling is missing, something quietly nags. People with a stronger innate need for autonomy are measurably more likely to make deliberate, values-driven choices about how they live, including how they design the spaces around them. For these people, a stripped-back room isn't an absence of things. It's evidence that the environment belongs to them rather than the other way around. Most people never feel that distinction, but people wired this way can't stop thinking about it. In that need, that particular way of being in the world tends to show up alongside something else. People drawn to minimalism are often quite sensitive, and I know that might sound counterintuitive. It's hard to imagine that someone who owns 30 things and lives in a bare apartment doesn't exactly scream emotional depth. But the research points in a surprising direction. The sensitivity is actually the reason they need less. Since they feel everything more intensely, environments with excessive stimulation don't just annoy them, they genuinely overwhelm them in a way that most people simply don't register. Most people's nervous systems have a kind of natural filtering mechanism. Background noise stays background. For a meaningful subset of people drawn to minimalism, that filter is thinner. Everything gets through. Psychologist Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people, which roughly accounts for 15 to 20% of the population, found that this trait is largely innate and stays that way across a lifetime. People who score high on sensory processing sensitivity are measurably more affected by environmental stimulation, and they consistently report preferring quieter, less cluttered spaces. It's driven by a biological need rather than an aesthetic preference. Which reframes the whole thing, because if that's true, minimalism for these people isn't a lifestyle choice. They're not curating a look, but an environment where they can finally breathe. If you think of your brain like a phone with a certain amount of battery, every single thing in your environment that catches your eye, a pile of clothes, a stack of books, a notification, a mess in the corner, uses a little bit of that battery just by existing in your field of vision. You're not consciously thinking about any of it, but your brain is still processing it, still allocating resources to it in the background. A 2011 study found that when multiple unrelated things compete for your attention at the same time, your brain literally cannot give full processing power to any single one of them. It splits. And that's not a you problem. There's related evidence suggesting that people who are intrinsically motivated to think deeply, a high need for cognition, it's called, tend to be more deliberate about managing their environments. Now, imagine that's already happening. That split isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's the difference between a day where you can think clearly and one where everything feels harder than it should for no obvious reason. This is part of why some people become almost obsessive about keeping their spaces clear, and not just for aesthetic reasons. It's keeping enough mental space free so that a thought can actually finish forming before something else interrupts it. The writers, the artists, the people doing their best work in nearly empty rooms aren't trying to look a certain way. They're just quietly protecting the one resource that actually matters to them. Russell Belk, a consumer psychologist, proposed something in 1988 that sits underneath all of this, quieter than the other research, but perhaps more unsettling. He referred to it as the extended self, which is the idea that we add our belongings to our identity. Our identity is implicitly represented by the things we own and the current possession of these items. Most people construct an identity through outward layers of objects and accumulated stuff until the picture feels whole. Minimalists have come to a different conclusion, often without knowing how, that a self built on objects is structurally fragile. Objects break or get lost. Their orientation is towards an identity that does not require inventory to feel a wholeness. It's a conclusion that takes most people a significant amount of loss to even begin to approach, which may be why the same wiring that draws someone to minimalism also leaves them unusually exposed when life decides to test it. That need, that particular way of being in the world, can become overwhelming as the pressure mounts until it just becomes unbearable enough to need to be outsourced. And minimalism is structurally perfect in ways most people never examine. Picture someone 3 days after a breakup. So not the crying on the floor kind of 3 days, the eerily functional kind where they've gone quiet and started moving through the apartment with a bin bag. The ex's things go first, obviously, then the things that were adjacent to the ex, then the things that were just there, taking up space, making the room feel like before. There's a version of this that looks from the outside like getting your life together, and maybe it is, but it can also be the only way a person knows how to make the inside of their chest feel less like wreckage, one cleared surface at a time. There's an iteration of minimalism that has almost nothing to do with clarity. It's control dressed up as peace. According to psychologists, what is happening is termed compensatory behavior. It's using concrete, controllable actions to manage feelings that are abstract or beyond control. Every object that leaves is a small hit of agency, like proof to yourself that you still have power over something. But the cycle of small hits is that they wear off, so you need another one. The threshold for what counts as excess keeps creeping lower, and at some point, the simplicity that was supposed to feel like freedom starts to feel like its own kind of cage, just a very clean, photogenic one. The person isn't building spaciousness anymore, they're building distance from their grief and uncertainty, whoever they were before everything changed. Under enough pressure, the need for autonomy that usually shows up as intentional and grounded can tip into something more compulsive. The traits themselves don't change, just what they're being asked to handle. And when life is steadier, those same traits produce something worth admiring. That tension can exist inside the same person, sometimes in the same week. Minimalism is more complicated than it looks on the surface. People drawn to it tend to feel things more intensely, care more deeply about their environment actually reflecting who they are, and pick up on the cost of overstimulation in ways most people never have to think about. That doesn't go away when things get difficult. It just shifts, and sometimes what it shifts towards is clearing out a room because that feels more manageable than dealing with whatever's actually going on inside. The real question, whether someone's minimalism is a genuine expression of how they're wired or a way of keeping busy while avoiding something harder, almost never gets asked out loud. But for the people it applies to, the answer is usually sitting right there, waiting. They just have to be willing to stop long enough to look at it. What is your nervous system asking for right now? Not what your Pinterest board says or what the algorithm keeps showing you. What does your body actually do when you walk into a full room versus an empty one? And have you ever stopped long enough to honestly listen to the answer? I hope this resonated with you in some way or put words to something you've been thinking about for a while. It would mean a lot if you subscribed. There's also a join button on the channel if you ever want to directly support what I'm doing here.